Thank you so much, Jim, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. Today, I am very happy to share with you a 5 to 7 minute speech on how to create and maintain a website. Before I begin, I'd like to do an informal poll of the audience. Who here has experience making a website? Can you raise your hand? You have 3, 4? Yes, maybe half the people. This is great. Well, welcome. I'd like to explain some of the benefits of making a website as well, and also go into some different ways that you can create them. If you don't know any coding, you can create websites using different tools, or if you want to get into some programming, I'll also give you some starting points on that as well. So a bit about my background. I am a senior software developer at SAP Canada, and I studied both computer science and business at Simon Fraser University. And when I was in university, I discovered that making websites was a very enjoyable activity. I typically played around with the school's web servers, which allowed me to create my own website and also write dynamic scripts on the back end using what's called CGI. Back in the day, you could use CGI to write a script that would respond to the user's request in different ways based on some code that you wrote. So quickly I discovered that I could write some PHP applications. I'll write this terminology here for you in the whiteboard. PHP. And it's called CGI. So these are the first tools I used to make my dynamic websites. And I used PHP in my first website to communicate with the Google API. When I was in school, Google actually had a very nice API, Google API, and Google would let you use your PHP script and talk to Google.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Google is listening to me in my home as well. And I would be able to get back a search result. So this is really cool because I could write a script that would get information from Google. So one of the ideas that I came up with was a website that would, if you enter somebody's name, let's say I entered the name Geoff, I would do 3 searches on Google. I would search for Mr. Geoff, and I would search for Mrs. Geoff, and I would search for Ms. Geoff. And what happened, I think I might have also searched for a Miss Geoff. And each of these results would come back with some results. But in the result, it also contained the count of how many web pages on Google contained that result. So Mr. Geoff might come back with, say, 10 million results. Mrs. Geoff may be only 8,000. Ms. Geoff would be 7,200. And maybe Ms. Geoff would be 15,000. So what I would do in my software is I would try to calculate, is this name Geoff typically used for a man or a woman, or is it more a gender neutral name? So I would typically add up all of the women search phrases, and then I would compare that against the Mr. Geoff search phrase, and that would give me an estimate on the gender of that person. So I developed what's called the Gender Guesser website, which now is called the Baby Name Guesser. And I was able to use some basic database accesses to produce a site that would give information about the gender of names. This was typically very handy for people who are contacting people they don't know in other countries where they're not familiar with their ethnic names and whether they should address them as Dear Sir or Dear Madam. And so this was a very popular website for especially people in call centers in India who wanted to contact people all over the world. And this website is still around today, although the traffic is kind of not doing so well. It's kind of haven't updated it for a long time, so Google is sending fewer and fewer people to my site. But let's talk about how did I make this website. If you don't know any coding, you can still create a website, and I'll first talk about that. if you don't know how to code, you can go to wordpress.com. You can create a free blog. And a blog is where you can post articles and videos and information, recipes, whatever you are interested in, you can share it with the world. And the most popular platform for making websites, blogs, is WordPress. And incidentally, as I mentioned previously, the word PHP, WordPress is built under the hood on PHP. So everything is pretty customizable. You can add plugins, and it's very handy to create a blog there. But if you want to get into some coding and make your own website, you could host WordPress yourself on your own web server. So typically you need to pay for web hosting. And you'd pay something typically maybe between $5 and $10 a month to a provider such as GoDaddy. And that would be a place that you could host your PHP website. Some other technologies that are useful for you to learn if you want to do some web page coding are HTML, which is the structure of the website as well as the content. So this stands for Hypertext Markup Language. I'm sure everyone here has heard of HTML as one of the fundamental technologies behind the World Wide Web. Other technologies that you need to know are CSS, which is Cascading Style Sheets, which lets you style your HTML documents. And if you want to add some interactivity, you can use something called JavaScript, which is quite an amazing, powerful language. I know Katie and I both work on the same team, and she and I are working on JavaScript all the time, as well as TypeScript. And there's probably thousands and thousands of libraries for JavaScript and packages, and you don't have to write a lot of code yourself. You can just make use of other people's open source code and put it all together to add interactivity. You may want to think of using something called React or jQuery. So I see I've reached the end of my time today, but this gives you a bit of insight into how you can create a web page yourself. If you don't know anything about it and you want to get started, go to WordPress, or you can start learning about some of these related technologies and maybe make some interesting creative ideas, such as the gender guesser that I talked about earlier. Thanks. I'll turn it back to our chair, Jim.